Have you ever asked a question that was like an existential question? One of those questions that you asked the question, but you didn't know that the answer was gonna like blow your mind? The other day I asked Google, how are hot dogs made? I made a huge mistake. It blew my mind. It actually changed my perception of life, okay? I'm never gonna eat a hot dog that's not 100% beef or 100% turkey. I made the mistake of, for many years of my life, eating whatever slob those hot dogs are actually made out of. It's disgusting. And it changed my reality, but I think sometimes, like, as we've grown up and we've tried to learn more about the world, we've asked questions that have honestly just blown our minds away. I remember when I first asked myself the question of, how do we make music? How did we grab sound that comes out of our mouths and somehow transport it into a device that isn't connected to my mouth? I speak into it, and the frequencies and the wavelengths of my voice goes into this device that is then transmitted in the invisible, in this, whatever this is, into a board that then goes into the speakers. Have you ever wondered how that happens? Some genius over 100 years ago asked a question of, is it possible to harness the human voice? And throughout that question, it led him to ask deeper questions. How can I harness the voice of a person? And then it led him into physics and mathematics and electronics. And then we found out that every single word that we speak, that our vocal cords, they produce frequencies that can get captured by the right frequency. Every one of our voices has power behind it. And it's insane to think about. But it's true, and I would have never have found out how this was invented and how it was comprised of unless I'd have asked that kind of question. So I think all of us can agree that we ask questions that are sometimes life-changing. But one of the places where I've found that wondering and asking questions seems to not be so prevalent is the church. And I'm not talking about learning scriptures. I think the reason why a lot of us in the faith space have created so many different denominations is because of questions and then answers that we've either agreed with or disagreed with. But what has happened in the faith space, whether you be young or really old, is that we've accepted things that we have asked, but we've hardly asked really deep questions that we have sought the answer for ourselves. I've met a lot of people who are really good at regurgitating information. Have you ever regurgitated information really good? Anyone here? Like in high school, I was really good at listening and throwing away everything my teacher said. She would say something and I got it, opened the door, bell rang. What are we talking about in there? I have no idea what we talked about. What a waste of time. And then the test would come on, it happened, and I'd be like, she didn't teach us this. I'd start blaming the teacher. She didn't teach us this. And what I began to realize is in our school, if we don't take it seriously, if we don't do our own studying, if we don't work hard to find the answers and show our work on how we arrive there, then we just begin to regurgitate things, and when we sort of share them, they kind of go in the wind. Like the frequency, the power of what we say just goes with our voice, but it's never true to us. Like that math teacher who was like, show your work. And I was, lady, I got the answer. That is my work. And what I realized in math is they're trying to teach us critical thinking skills, to not just know the answer to things, but to also understand the way that we got there. And I think a lot of times in the faith space, we accept what we're told, but we never struggle with the things that seem to be incredible dilemmas in our life on our own. And then when somebody gives us a claim that we don't agree with, we just say, I disagree, but we have like no reason really to disagree. It's just, that doesn't feel right. And I think in the faith space, in a lot of places, when you begin to question things. Not necessarily questioning people's authority, not necessarily questioning people in a negative sense, but start questioning the kind of thoughts that you have and the kind of impressions and doctrines that are taught to you, that the faith space kind of rejects that. There was a time in history where churches were just full of singing hymns, and people were wearing like long like robes and pointy hats and stuff, and a lot of churches are still doing that because of tradition. But what we've seen over hundreds of years is new generations bring on new perspectives into the faith space. And when the faith space rejects such things like the drums, there was a time when people thought the drums were from hell, that the devil created drums. And sadly enough, in the scriptures, it tells us that they used to worship God with drums. So I don't know where they got this from, but that you couldn't have long hair, you couldn't dress like me, you couldn't go to a space because we said so. And so the church has always had this really hard time in allowing people to wonder and ask questions and bring new ideas and new thoughts. And by the way, some ideas and some thoughts should stay in your mind because they're probably horrible. But I've always been of the philosophy that the best idea should always win. And I want to invite you to wonder on your own, to ask questions. See, on Sunday at House, we talked about choosing wonder, to not choosing to ever be stagnant, to not choose to stay stuck to the past, but to ask questions and search for the truth. I think that if for the rest of your life, you only know what I've told you, that it's a life that you didn't live on your own. A life where you did not think your own thoughts freely. Just a life that you lived because of my words. And the words of God, they speak to every single one of us. And they change us. See, the other day, I was talking to my baby girl. And she was just listening because she's a baby. And I was like, and I can't wait till we do picnics and we look at clouds. And then I said, clouds. And I thought to myself, she has no idea what a cloud is. And then I go ahead and try to describe, like a cloud, like cotton candy. Freak. She doesn't know what cotton candy is. And I was like sugar that's spun. She doesn't know what sugar is and what does it mean to spin sugar. And then all of a sudden I realized that for somebody who doesn't even know what clouds are, describing a cloud is really difficult. And so I spent 5 minutes trying to describe to my baby what a cloud is. She hasn't even come out of her mom's stomach, but she needs to learn these things now. She needs to learn about the hard-hitting issues of life now. And talking to her about this, and I realized I was breaking it down for her, and I didn't even know what a cloud was made up of. I was like, it's got wind, and it's got particles, and air, and it floats, it's in the sky. And Kara goes, and water. And I go, oh, yeah. It's also got water and rain. But I began to rediscover something that I've known all my life because I was seeing it for the second time in my life as a baby who doesn't know anything. And I think that's the attitude that we need to take when it comes to God. Because we will never fully understand God, but you know what? At every stage of our life, we will know him in a new way if we search and wonder for the truth of the fullness of who God is. And there's a scripture in Psalms chapter 32. I love Psalms. I love David. I love you, David. And I love this David as well, the original David. He's cool. You're cooler. And I want to bring some context as to what I'm about to read because we oftentimes don't realize how prolific and how intelligent the people of the scriptures were. Some were not very educated. Some did not have bachelor's degree in theologies. They just knew God. But in this specific psalm, which really means like a poetic writing, a poetic scripture, it's titled Maskil. And what a maskil is essentially a poem from an enlightened mind. Have you ever heard of someone that's been enlightened? Look at these light bulbs. When we think of somebody who's enlightened, we think about the light bulbs like, boo, they could see everything clearly. There was a time in history where it was the Enlightenment period, where philosophy, just technology just skyrocketed, where people all of a sudden could just imagine things that never existed before and created them. And so David is having this enlightened moment. And look what he says. In verse 8, chapter 32 of Psalms, he says, I will instruct you and teach you in the way you go. This is him speaking for God, writing from when he hears from God. Remember, he's been enlightened. He's been spoken to, and his eyes are seeing clearly for the first time. I will instruct you and teach you in the way you should go. I will counsel you with my eye upon you. Other scriptures say that I will counsel you, I will guide you with you in mind. And so immediately what we find in the scripture is that what God is saying, what God is describing to David, what God is telling us when we are connected to him, is that he will always have us in mind as we go on in search about the truth and the fullness of life. That whole chapter, David is coming to realization about sin, about thoughts in his mind that are destructive, about the beauties of God. And isn't it so funny that sometimes the moments that we see God the most is the moments when we've hit our lowest points? See, David is doing like this incredible realization of, I've sinned and you make me pure, and life without you is just not, you don't have those existential moments in your life unless something wrong is going in your life, or you're so present in the moment. And he's having this enlightened moment where his entire reality is seemingly shifting. Entire moment where God is becoming clear, and he hears God say to him that I will guide you with you in mind. In other words, God, when we attach ourselves to God, God is not afraid of us asking questions that we would not dare to ask anyone else. I mean, he already knows what you think, but there's something powerful when you sort of bring into existence your thoughts into words, where it's this thing that you're just like declaring when you speak, that you kind of say like, God, I don't know about this. I don't know about that. God, I want to know more about you. What does it mean to follow you? What does it mean for you to love me? God, I don't understand these scriptures. God, was this literal? Was this metaphorical? Give me the tools. Give me the ability to see beyond the scriptures. And the scriptures tell us that when we ask these questions, when we are attached to God and he is guiding us, he has us in mind. When you have someone in mind, you're thinking the best of them. You're thinking that you're going to guide them to the correct direction. Now, I'm not saying you don't need people in your life to go, whoa, what? Dude, that's wrong, right? But what I'm saying is that for all your life, what you know to be right is what other people have told you and not what you have found from the voice of God, that you are in real danger. Because you may be living somebody else's life and calling it your own. And I think that you need to realize that you're really young. You are. And what's really helped me in my life elevate to certain rooms and positions that I would have never have thought to have been in wasn't how much I knew, it was how much I was willing to learn. It was how much I was willing to be humbled. You know, the word humiliated and the word humble, they're like cousins. They're like in the same family. They come from the same etymology. And so to be humbled is kind of related to be humiliated. You have no idea how many times I had to have been humiliated in front of very successful people in order to begin to understand the thought processes and the type of success that the people that I was in these rooms with, how my humility seemed like getting so many answers wrong. So it wasn't that I knew everything that opened the door for me to be with very successful people and hear them and learn from them. It was that I was always willing to learn and always putting my ego aside. I think a big reason why in church we don't wonder, we don't ask questions is because our ego's in the way that we may not know everything. And you that are so young, that you are exploring the world, don't think that what gets you in the most successful and greatest rooms in the planet is how much you know. It's how much you've learned. And it's the same thing with God. You do not know the fullness of him yet. And you may never. But what you do have the ability to do is wonder. Wonder and ask questions. God will hear you. And he has you in mind. So don't be afraid that perhaps you don't know everything. What you should fear is that everything you know is not something you learned. So there's another thing in Philippians, and then I want to go ahead and open this up for questions. And I'll be honest, I don't have the answers to everything, but I do have a willing heart to learn with you. So if you do have questions, get them geared up. In Philippians chapter 4, verse 12. I'm sorry, verse 8. It reads, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things." Verse 9, "What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you." See, the other part of wonder is that it can never be stagnant. There's no way that you can wonder for the rest of your life and not wonder every single day. And here's the secret to wondering every day effectively, because you could sit on the sofa and think all day and get nothing accomplished. This morning I came into work. We do prayer at work before we start. We prayed, and anyway, I go upstairs. My coworker's working on the desk already, and I go, "Hey, I didn't see you this morning in the prayer. Were you here?" And he was like, "Yeah, I was there. I just like to be invisible. I didn't see you." And I had this very existential moment because I'm a deep thinker, and I go, "Isn't that funny?" And he kind of listens to me, and I go, "Isn't that funny? That for all our lives, we are invisible, trying to get noticed. And then when we get noticed, we just want to be invisible." And a guy in the corner goes, "No, it's 7 a.m. It's easy for me to think about these things. It is. I'm sorry. But I think about these things and my mind just goes crazy. And the other day I was crying, talking to my baby in the stomach, because as I was talking to her, I could vision her first steps in a cute dress, and at the same time envisioning her walking down the aisle to a man that does not deserve her. And then I thought about my parents passing away and taking steps into life. And then I thought about me getting old and seeing my own daughter grow old, all within 50 seconds. And my mind, it's a blessing. It's also just terribly sad sometimes. But I envisioned everything, and I felt like I just saw my whole daughter's life in a minute. And I cried. I just began to cry. And Kara's like, what's wrong? And I'm just like, I don't know how to explain it, but I just saw the future. But wouldn't it be a tragedy if I envisioned that and dreamt of that in my daughter's life, but it was always just a thought that I never actively walked into, never actively did or experienced? That'd be a tragedy to imagine that and never see it. And when we ask questions and they're not active in practice, when we're not actively learning, then our wondering is meaningless, because the point of asking questions to God, asking questions about God, learning about God, wondering about God, is that they would lead us to walk in the steps of the things we've learned. So what Paul says in Philippians, what the scripture is telling us is whatever you've learned, that you don't just think it, that you don't just wonder it, but you walk it. Because as you walk those steps that you've learned, as you practice those steps, the paths to the type of life that God is guiding you towards becomes enlightened. So let's have an enlightened conversation.